It is the fight of a lifetime, a battle for equality. Will women win the right to vote, or will they fail? Here is a preview of The Woman's Hour, Our Fight for the Right to Vote, by Elaine, Weiss. Carrie Catt had spent the whole day sitting on a train, clattering over 1,000 miles from New York City to Nashville, Tennessee. In the hours she wasn't reading field reports and legal documents, rimless eyeglasses perched on her nose, she was skimming the newspapers and sneaking in a few pages of a detective novel. She couldn't help it. Carrie loved a good mystery. She, the president of the National American Woman Suffrage Association, NAWSA, Susan B. Anthony's heir, the woman the suffragists called the Chief, had been called one last time to lead the fight to give women the vote. At least, she really hoped this would be the last time. Her hair was silver and wavy now, but she had retained the sly smile, piercing blue eyes and arched eyebrows that had always made her look either amused or annoyed, depending on her mood. And she definitely wasn't amused this evening, as her train rattled toward Tennessee in the dusky twilight of July 17, 1920. She was just plain worried. Carrie's life mission was to fight for freedom. American women still didn't have the most basic right of democracy, the vote, for more than 70 years. Ever since the first women's rights meeting in Seneca Falls, New York in 1848, generations of her suffrage sisters had faced public scorn as they campaigned, marched, and pleaded for their simple right to vote. Now, finally, woman's suffrage was within sight. The Tennessee legislature would be called into special session in a few weeks. Legislators, all men, of course, would gather to vote on ratifying the 19th Amendment. If they ratified it, it would enter the U.S. Constitution and become the law of the land. The 19th Amendment was just one simple sentence stating that a citizen's right to vote could not be denied on account of sex. Nothing revolutionary, according to Carrie Catt. It was only what she thought women, citizens of the United States, truly deserved. A year later, in June 1919, the amendment had finally been pushed through both houses of the U.S. Congress. After 40 whole years of delay, Carrie had been overjoyed and relieved when that news arrived. But passing through Congress was just the first step. The amendment then moved to the states for ratification. Carrie knew it would be a tough fight. Suffragists had to convince at least 36 state legislatures to accept the amendment. By July 1920, 35 states had ratified the amendment, 9 had rejected it, 3 were refusing to even consider it. That left only Tennessee as a possible 36th state, the very last state needed to make American women's dreams of voting come true. If the Suffs could only persuade the Tennessee legislature to pass the amendment, women's suffrage would become American law. That meant every woman in every state would get to vote in every single election. That included local elections like those for mayors, governors, and senators, as well as the election of the nation's president. It would spell victory at last, and just in time for the presidential election in a few months. That is, assuming the suffragists could convince the state of Tennessee to support their cause. Carrie's young assistant, Marjorie Schuler, had already arrived in Nashville to see what the Suffs were up against. Marjorie had met with the Tennessee suffrage leaders, talked to politicians, skimmed the newspapers, and eavesdropped on talk in the hotel lobbies. It hadn't taken her long to realize that Nashville was a hornet's nest. Word had it that the legislature was corrupt and that these politicians could be easily bribed. Plus, the governor, Albert Roberts, was caught in a nasty fight to hold on to his job and win his next election. Getting all tangled up with the amendment's ratification was the last thing he wanted to do. Marjorie wasn't optimistic about the fight in Tennessee. She had sent a wire to NAWSA headquarters in New York that read, "Regard outlook hopeless under present conditions." Carrie had bought her ticket to Nashville as soon as she received that message. For the past 2 weeks, she'd given her suffragist peers stern directions, warning them to get ready for an ugly fight. The anti-suffs will flood Tennessee with the most outrageous literature it has ever been your lot to read, she told them, drawing from her experience in the other southern states. It will contain outright lies, innuendos, and near truths, which are more damaging than lies. Furthermore, she added, the race issue would be put forth in the ways to arouse the greatest possible prejudice. Carrie had been battling for women's suffrage for so long. As her train sped past rural, tree-lined landscapes, she could still feel the sting of the very first time she had confronted injustice. Back then, she hadn't yet known women's rights was a cause she could fight for. Carrie grew up a pigtailed Iowa farm girl, curious and a bit of a bookworm. She often borrowed her father's newspapers, and she liked to chime in when her parents talked politics at the dinner table. Carrie's mother, especially, was well-read and informed about so many important topics. Carrie wanted to be just like her. But on Election Day, 1872, with Ulysses Grant facing off against newspaper publisher Horace Greeley for the seat in the White House, 13-year-old Carrie had watched confused as her father prepared to ride into town to vote for the president, while her mother remained home. "Shouldn't you be getting ready to go vote with the other grown-ups?" Carrie had asked her mother. The whole family laughed. She still remembered the embarrassment, the hot tears welling up. Women weren't allowed to vote, her father explained, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. Only men were allowed. Voting was much too important to be left to women. Carrie was immediately angry. Her mother knew as much about the candidates and the important issues as her father did, maybe even more. She deserved to vote for the president, too. And, worst of all, this meant that one day Carrie wouldn't be allowed to vote either. Carrie didn't take kindly to rules that made it seem she was less important, less smart, or less capable than boys were. Those rules weren't fair. And this has been a preview of The Woman's Hour.